Alright, whatever. Let me do like a fucking YouTube style intro. Alright, what's up? Today we're gonna be talking about tier lists. And today we're gonna be tiering Mythic plus affixes. I have all the affixes of all time, including some favorites like Necrotic and Overflowing that haven't been seen for a while, that have been removed. And we're gonna kind of talk about what to do with affixes in general. Personally, huge advocate for a large affix overhaul next expansion. I would love to see that happen. That'd be kind of nice. We're going to today kind of talk about all the affixes that we have and have had, not seasonals, and then we're just going to kind of talk about like where they would land on a tier list here, whether it be, you know, fun, actively fun to play, or whether or not they need to be reworked or deleted, or if they're just like okay. So we're going to talk about the first two, which are Tyrannical and Fortified. I would be inclined to either put Tyrannical and Fortified in rework or fine. They're definitely one or the other. I would say that they're not like actively bad affixes. So whenever Blizzard talks about Tyrannical and Fortified, they talk about the weeks wanting to feel different in regards to what they do, right? Where they want Tyrannical to be a lot longer bosses and more epic boss encounters, where they want Fortified to have that trash, have a bit more oomph to it. And in some aspects, they achieve that. And so, like, from that element, I think that they are fine, right? The weeks do definitely feel different enough. Some weeks feel super strong on the boss, some weeks feel super strong on the trash. But in general, I think the reason that Tyrannical and Fortified are super polarizing is, first off, they're just present the most often out of all the affixes that we currently have. And so, of course, they're always going to be the candidate to be talked about the most. And I think that something that Blizzard did a good job on with Tyrannical and Fortified is kind of forcing people to play both with how the scoring system works. Now, to play devil's advocate a little bit and talk about the reason that they should probably be reworked is because Tyrannical and Fortified are just a bit too polarizing. And it's especially true this season, where it's a season full of a lot of one-shots. And so, like, bosses start to become exponentially longer on Tyrannical. And it just becomes this weird situation where Tyrannical and boss HP in general always becomes a problem in Mythic Plus. They did a good job of removing spawned enemies off the Tyrannical versus Fortified table. So now, you know, adds that are spawned off bosses don't scale with Tyrannical. But at the same point, there's still, you know, 6, 7, 8 minute long fights in a couple of Mythic Plus dungeons, and that just feels like that's completely out of line. Like the last boss of Fall, Aridicron is somewhere between a 7-minute to an 8-minute encounter on, you know, like 28, 29, 30. And then, you know, a fight like y'all knew the last boss of Everbloom, that fight easily gets up to like 6.5 minutes on Tyrannical, where, you know, those fights are like 4 and 5 minutes on Fortified. And so whenever that's the case, you know, something just kind of feels wrong. There's always a bunch of weird scaling stuff with Tyrannical and Fortified, so that does make me question as to whether or not it should be reworked. I think a lot of it comes down to the fact that like 15% boss HP is always going to be very difficult to balance relative to 15% trash HP, because trash, the way that you speed up a key for Fortified is, and I mean, it's something that we've always talked about, you just pull bigger. Where for Tyrannical, there's a bit more nuance to it. And I think that they just keep designing bosses poorly around Tyrannical and Fortified, which is why I would be inclined to put them in rework. But I think for the point of this video, I think I'll probably put them in fine. I wouldn't be opposed to seeing just like some changes to how Tyrannical and Fortified kind of work. I've seen some people kind of talk about removing the HP modifier on both Tyrannical and Fortified. I don't know if that necessarily solves it, and I don't know if that necessarily achieves what Blizzard's looking to achieve with Tyrannical and Fortified, but definitely could be something interesting. And it's been nerfed, like both of these have been nerfed so often that it makes me kind of question like how good are they? Like, are they actually fine for the game or not? Anyways. Okay, so next up, this is the Afflicted icon. Afflicted, I don't think is the greatest affix ever. There's a lot of problems with Afflicted, particularly when depending on like your comp. There's a lot of compositional restrictions, and there was multiple times this season where I would say, if you don't have like a great comp for it, so say you're running Vengeance Demon Hunter, Havoc Demon Hunter, Warlock, Aug Evoker, Healer, you're only gonna have like 2 dispels for Afflicted, and that feels pretty tough. I would say that the affix isn't like hard, but I think it's a bit overly punishing in ways that's not like ideal. Especially like the 50% haste reduction for letting one go off is like pretty tough. There was also been multiple times where we're watching Mistweaver monks as well. I watch like a Mistweaver monk play with a Bear Druid and a couple rogues occasionally, and they let like they don't let 3 afflicted, like 3 afflicted go off per run. Also lately there's been this kind of like weird bug with afflicted where they're eating things like radiance and chi G shields and stuff like that, which is not great in most situations. It's fine in a lot of situations, but it's not awesome if somebody's not getting atoned or getting a chi G shield in a couple of spots. And so I would like to see that maybe a bit changed. Afflicted is either bad or fine. It's one of the two of these. I think that the compositional restrictions on Afflicted just in general make it not awesome. I would say that I would, in the scope of like what we're going to be doing with like ranking the affixes, I probably would put it in fine because there's a lot of other affixes that are significantly worse than Afflicted. So I guess I'll put it in fine. Apparently they also eat Grove Guardian's tree healing from Resto Druid as well, which is annoying. Good catch though. All right, Bolstering. Bolstering is so unfun to play. I don't know necessarily where to rank it. So it's either between bad or rework. I think the biggest issue with Bolstering, and a lot of the on-death affixes are kind of like this, is that they're easily either trivial or so hard that they're like really, really cringe. Bolstering in general has always been a pretty bad affix. I would probably be, oh man, this is going to delete maybe. I don't know. I think that I'd probably put this in bad. I would in general like to see Bolstering go. It's been nerfed 100 times at this point. It got nerfed to have a duration. It got nerfed to not spawn on bosses. It got nerfed from how much damage and health it was gaining to no longer even gaining health, and now it's just gaining damage, and it still feels very bad. I think there's a problem is like whenever it's also like paired up with other fortified affixes. Like for some reason there's like a week this week that's fortified Bolstering, which is like really, really punishing for your tank. It just creates this weird texture to the dungeon that I don't think that Blizzard should be looking to balance around. Like the first pull of Everbloom. So the first pull of Everbloom goes from doable to completely undoable on just Bolstering, because like anything with an abomination is going to instantly kill you. If you don't perfectly move for the berserkers, they're going to instantly kill you. Any stinger is going to instantly kill you too. And they just add like a lot of non-avoidable damage. And now that I'm talking myself into it, I think that I'm going to end up going with delete here, because I don't think that Blizzard necessarily needs to like really design the dungeons with on-death affixes in mind. Now I think that they should, because they're in the dungeons right now. But like I don't think that they should be. I don't think that they should need to do like such a sweeping pass with something like Bolstering. Next up is Bursting. I think Bursting is actually fine. I think that Bursting weeks actually are probably some of the more interesting weeks in general. I know that this is a bit controversial, so just try to explain my POV here. So for average players, generally they don't like Bursting. Bursting's a really hard affix, especially in pugs, especially when people don't press their defensives, especially whenever people are willing to roll Bursting. In addition to that, it's just a lot easier to roll Bursting at like lower key levels. But once you get higher up, Bursting is actually a pretty trivial affix. Very rarely you're going to be wiping your Bursting. Your group is going to be a bit more controlled with their damage. You're going to get, on average, fewer stacks as well, because people aren't going to be able to roll because the mobs just have a bit more HP. I think that Bursting in general is probably fine. I think that the issue with Bursting, and the reason that's probably not going to be going into the fun category, is because of the problems that it has for like, you know, lower level players. I think that is just too problematic for that. Where for higher end players, they just don't really run into these issues, and so these aren't personal issues that I experience every day. Not that they don't exist, but it's just not something that I end up running into, because like doing higher level keys just makes Bursting much easier. Yeah, Bursting and Everbloom has nothing to do with whether or not it's a higher key. Yeah, I mean Bursting and Everbloom, but I will say you're gonna pull a bit differently. And also you get like better healers once you start to go to higher levels too. At some point your healer just like stops letting you wipe to even like 15 or 20 stacks of Bursting, right? Where, you know, not like a Mistweaver Monk is going to be able to heal through that. A Restoger is going to be able to heal through that. You know, you're going to drop a Link. The Disc Priest is going to Mass Dispel us, or actually your tank is going to know that Mass Dispel is available or not, and whether or not we're able to pull like that. Yeah, I mean, getting 20 stacks of bursting is kind of annoying. I will say it's kind of similar issue to what Bolstering had, where I think that Blizzard just does a really poor job of managing what mobs do on-death affixes or not. Like the Hounds and Waycrest Manor doing on-death affixes is completely unnecessary. Same with all the Lashers and Everbloom. Like, for what reason? Like, actually, for what reason are they getting bursting and getting Bolstering? So, I don't know. I think that's obviously something that's stupid. But I think all on-death affixes kind of run into this issue where they're contingent on Blizzard having a really good understanding of what is and isn't a problem with on-death affixes, which I don't love, being beholden to them having to make sure that these mobs are flagged for not doing on-death affixes. I don't love that. Entangling, probably the first fun affix. I think Entangling just in general is like the acceptable, is like the best level of it can do something to you in a key. It can be a bit annoying at times, especially like in, you know, whenever there are like weird overlaps with mechanics. There's definitely some times where Entangling, you have to like engage with it, but at the same point, it's not like taking over your key. There's not like a ton of agency. You're not playing the affix. You're playing the dungeons, and I think that probably makes for one of the best affixes. Entangling is only fun because it doesn't matter whatsoever. I don't think so. I don't think like that. I think it's more in the line of fun because, in my personal opinion, it does what affixes should be doing, where it's like, you're definitely playing the dungeon whenever it's an Entangling week. And while Entangling still requires the minigame to be played, very rarely are you going to be getting stunned by Entangling unless you are actively not going with the affix. And there are some overlaps that make Entangling, maybe I would describe it as a little bit annoying. Like the last boss of Darkheart Thicket, whenever you're spawning the puddle on you, if you get Entangling at the same time, you can just die to the projectile speed. But like, it's not like the end of the world, right? It's an affix. It's kind of how it should work. But every class feels like they have a way to pretty easily deal with it as well. So yeah, I could see a certain couple of issues that could happen with Entangling. Like if they brought back Toldagor, the last boss of Toldagor, where you can't move, that would kind of be annoying for Entangling. But in general, I think it's fine. I honestly think it's fun, and I think it's like, whenever they're designing what level of importance affixes should have, I think this is probably the level that Blizzard should probably go with. But that's just my personal opinion, of course. Explosive, Blizzard already did us a favor, deleted Explosive for us. I'm going to put this also in the delete category. I think that like the iteration of Explosive that we had for a while was fine. But I think I understand why the feedback reached the point that it did to where Explosive had to go. First and foremost, killing off the explosives even when they were dying to like one hit of damage. It ended up becoming a healer job. So that of course is going to be a problem whenever like almost 100% of the affix is just being done by one specific role. I don't love that, just as a general rule. And then Blizzard tried to buff it to give it more agency to the rest of the group, forcing you to DPS them. But like whenever you're actually having to commit a lot of damage to it, it just doesn't feel good to play. And so Blizzard, of course, went with the delete button on it, which I think they made the right call. It's just hard to make this affix work. And on top of that, like how much damage you were contributing, like just empty damage that was going into explosives every single run, always made it a bit hard to balance. I don't hate it in concept, but I do also maybe think it kind of falls into the category of too punishing, similar to kind of like where I have Afflicted, where it's like the consequences for failing this, especially for like how often they spawn, is just maybe a little bit too high. And then obviously there was a lot of, you know, boss pulls, dungeons, can you imagine doing the first pull of Everbloom and a bunch of explosives spawn? First pull of Alcathar Academy had a ton of explosives on it too, and it was just like nearly impossible because of the explosives. I don't love it. Just doesn't. It didn't really fit well. I think that Blizzard made the right call though to delete them. I always felt like explosive was fine, but the way the community treated it was cringe. Like people made it bad because they didn't want to do it. Well, a lot of it too came down to, so there were specific iterations where certain classes could and couldn't actually kill the explosives without attributing meaningful damage loss. And so, but then after BFA, whenever that was the case, Blizzard didn't then change it to be a lot lower HP. And very few classes have low damage filler abilities that they can actually slam into the explosive orbs that don't like really attribute any meaningful damage loss. So then whenever you're looking to like maximize it or like min-max it or optimize it, of course you're gonna like have the person whose globals effectively mean the least for damage do the explosive, which in most instances is going to be the healers, you know, Sunfire, Moonfire, you know, Blackout Kick, RS, like, you know, stuff like that. Or like tank autos, because you don't want to throw like medium or high damage abilities from a DPS into them, which is not very, I don't know. It just didn't feel like it was a group affix. It felt like it ended up being on one person, which I didn't love. Okay, Grievous. Oh man. So here are my thoughts on Grievous. I actually think it's good to have healer affixes. I don't think that Grievous was the greatest. Okay, so whenever you think about Grievous, it's supposed to be an affix for healers to interact with in like, oh, you do healing, you make sure that people are topped back up. Now I think that it was depending on the season, it was problematic in the sense of it was really hard to get people topped back up, especially once they fall further and further behind into Grievous. So in that regard, I don't like it. But in the concept of, oh, this is an affix that needs to be for healers to kind of interact with, I think it's because we had some that were just for healers, we had some that were just for tanks. And we kind of got away from that. I don't think that Grievous was the greatest design of this. And, like, imagine the third, yeah, somebody in chat says, imagine the third boss of DHT with Grievous on Tyran or something like that. That would be completely impossible. Like, it's just not a very good designed affix in that regard. I would be inclined to throw it in rework. It's rework or delete, and I think that Blizzard obviously went with the delete on Grievous. I think that you know, sunsetting it and moving on is totally valid option. I do think that there was maybe a way to make it a lot better. I don't put it in rework because I think that the Grievous concept is great, but I put it in rework because I think that there's maybe something there with like a healer affix just in general, and not one that's like you need to heal more, but just like something that, you know, interacts with healers a bit. You just said you didn't like explosive because it was a healer affix. No, I said I didn't like explosive because it became a complete burden on one player, and then the punishment level for not doing it was your group takes 50% of their health and damage. I don't think that Grievous is the best designed way of doing this, though. So I think that and I think it was too hard. And I think that some healers were like much better at it than others. So, I don't know. But like, the more that I'm talking about, the more I'm putting it in delete, I think. I think there's a room for an affix that's for healers like that, though. Incorporeal. Bad. My issue, I have a couple of issues with Incorp. So the first issue with Incorporeal is like spammable CC is always going to be pretty key here. I think the biggest issue that I have with Incorp is like it's really hard to tell where the mobs are spawning. Like you can see that, like if you see the ground effect and you see them summoning, it's like fine, but then it's like a lot of the times like it spawns relative to players, and if that player doesn't have like an ability to be able to like CC that Incorporeal quickly or whatever, then you're actually going to be starting to run into a lot of issues. I think that kind of similar to Afflicted, the punishment level is too high, and I think that it's just like a in scope like a worse version of like how Afflicted works. I don't think that either of them are very good. I think that there's something with like cast times also on the Incorporeal that's not very good. Like I think that having to hard cast an ability on the Incorporeal just for somebody to like snipe it on you. So say your priest is like hard casting Dominate Mind and they get mob, you know, caged like a millisecond before their Dominate Mind goes off. That just like feels so bad. Afflicted is a pain in a dungeons with actually a lot of dispels. Actually, okay, I'm being talked down on Afflicted, I think. So Afflicted, I guess another bigger issue is like, depending on your composition, again, it's still like either trivial or not. But in a dungeon that has like a lot of dispels, and particularly like magic dispels, think about a dungeon like Fall, where you have to dispel the bloom. Like, what are you supposed to do about your dispel there? What are you supposed to do about it on bosses if you have like 2 Incorporeal spawn, and then or 2 Afflicted spawn? I don't know. So I think both of these are probably bad. I don't know if they're necessarily in rework categories. Don't think they're ever very fun. Whenever you see them, you're like, oh, this kind of suck. The other person can get both, but yeah, so you technically have enough time on your dispel. Maybe if they put Afflicted to like 12 seconds or something like that. Because as it currently stands, I think it's like 8 or 9, or I think it's like 9 or 10. And like if you dispel like first global, the Afflicted starts like spawns, you're actually able to spell both of them, but it's kind of tough. There's also weird stuff where, yeah, you're trying to target the mob for a long period of time. I don't know. I think these are both, like, okay, especially with, like, how they summon. Like, they summon based on combat timer. Not able to be summoned whenever you're out of combat kind of thing. I think that's pretty reasonable. But I don't love them. I'm not in love with these affixes, just in general. Inspiring, terrible affix. I'm glad that it's gone. I think that any affix that requires you to like CC a mob due to arbitrary CC reduction restrictions is like pretty problematic. There was also a bunch of issues where inspiring would make mobs not kickable, which in most instances the inspiring mob was the kick mob. But like in general, I think that inspiring getting deleted was by and large the right call. I think that Blizzard was correct to do that. Inspiring definitely Nightmare and Pugs, even in higher level keys where you kind of know what the inspiring mob is and you're like paying attention to what's going on. It felt like it just had too much going for it, where you would have to like completely reroute your key in like in a bad way, not in like a fun way, just like a really bad way. Necrotic, yeah, I'm kind of glad it's gone. Yeah, now that I really think about it, there was never a good time where I'm just like, holy shit, it's a Necrotic, thank God. I don't think it could be anything else. Maybe kind of similar to Grievous could be in the rework tier, where this could be definitely reworked to be something that's a bit more digestible. I think that there's something there where there's an affix that kind of works on the tank, but I don't think it should be heal reduction. I think that heal reduction on getting auto-attacked by the mobs is just... It just forces this play pattern of like kiting and you know, there were some tanks that could deal with it and some that couldn't. So I think maybe in the current iteration, it would... Like, it's not necessarily exactly what I would want out of like a tank affix that's like that. Yeah, and then it also promotes you just having dwarves on everything, which is not great. I think, yeah, and then obviously heal reduction affects tanks differently, where Brewmaster Monk has a lot of dodge, so they don't stack up Grievous as fast. You know, block from Warrior, though, is block at the end of the day. It doesn't really matter. But then there's some tanks, you know, like Blood DK and Vintage Demon Hunter that heal themselves a lot. And so having heal reduction just doesn't affect all the tanks equally. Kind of similar issue with Grievous, where some healers were much better at Grievous than others. All the throughput healers are just at their core much better than, you know, Disc and HPAL at being able to kind of deal with Grievous. Overflowing. So for those who don't know, Overflowing was an affix that was really early in Legion. It was one of the first affixes in the game. And what it did is whenever somebody got overhealed, it turned into a heal absorb. And I think it got deleted because Holy Paladin struggled to be able to deal with Overflowing in any real way. Whereas the other healers, you know, Disc would apply Atonement and they would, like, you know, if it overhealed, they would immediately heal it off. A Resto Druid applied Hots, you know, if it overhealed, it would immediately heal it off. Whereas HPAL, and especially at the time, they would Holy Shock you, crit you, or like lay on hands or something like that, and then you just have this massive heal absorb, like your full health bar and like a heal absorb. And so I think that's one of the reasons that it got removed, is because just a one healer was noticeably worse. And even like H-Priest wasn't great at it, but you know, one healer was like really bad at it, while the other healers were like, it was kind of just like a thing. I think that this is maybe the candidate for the healer affix that gets put in rework. I think that there's something there. I think that Overflowing could honestly be brought back in some capacity and be a more reasonable affix, and I think that Could be something that Blizzard could explore a bit. But I don't think that the H-Pal putting a 50% absorb on somebody with while pressing lay on hands on them is like particularly productive. So maybe they would have to look at it in that regard. Maybe there's a cap on how much of heal absorb you can put, but something like that. I think that this could be pretty reasonable. Quaking. Okay, so I think that Quaking had to go. So the issue with Quaking is kind of similar to the on-death affixes, but it's like nearly impossible to fix, where they had to start adding modifiers to boss abilities to not allow you to get Quaking during them. There was one in Noku Defensive. Whenever you get gripped in, you just immediately die to the Quaking. In Shadow Moon Burial Grounds on Bone Maw, whenever you're getting sucked in, you just immediately die to the Quaking. There was so many of those instances where you would just like get full 5-man quaked because you're doing some RP or you're doing some mechanic, and it's just completely impossible. And they removed the automated damage on it, where before it used to be 15% of your health just taken whenever you got hit by quaking, but then it got changed to just being stacked on the players. I thought that was a great change. But I think in general, as time went on, it just became more and more of a problem in specific keys where you would just like randomly wipe your group to quaking, and that didn't feel super satisfying. And getting gripped in an Alg Academy to the last boss and then just like full quaking your group and dying immediately. It was either like more often than not you were paying attention to it. I thought the lockout was more fine. Like cast locking was like a bit okay. But I think the damage portion of it just made it to where it was just like impossible to balance. Raging, I'm gonna throw this back into rework category. We got to do something different with Raging. I think as it currently stands, Raging is too punishing to groups that don't have an AoE soothe. Overall, kind of similar issues as Inspiring. This had the same problems that Inspiring has, where overall it's like pretty much mandatory for Raging weeks. There are specific dungeons that are incredibly, incredibly difficult whenever you don't have a soothe in your group. I'm thinking Throne of the Tides, the first couple of pulls of Throne of the Tides without an AoE soothe are near impossible. The first pull of Black or Cold, while it is doable, again, it just becomes much harder. And it doesn't feel like you really have a lot of agency to figuring out like the pulls that you need to do, except for bring an Evoker, which I don't like that being a solution, right? I don't like one class being a solution to an affix in general. I've kind of advocated for this for a while. Once the mobs enrage, put 1 CC effect worth of raging immunity onto them, where if you Chaos Nova a pack that's fully enraged, the Chaos Nova doesn't hit, but the raging is removed. I think that something like that could definitely be a move in the right direction. But the fact that you're seeing people be like, bring back old raging after old raging was actively harmful to the game, I think is kind of funny, because this new raging is also annoying in different ways. But I think that there's definitely ways to make this and rework this into being something that's a more reasonable affix than currently what it is. It's just really hard to play, not very fun. Not that it's actually impossible in some areas, although it makes some dungeons just noticeably harder. Sanguine. It's probably fine. I think that Sanguine's actually hard in seasons that the timers are actually really difficult, especially at like high end. Sanguine is pretty hard. I think that a lot of the active changes that they made towards Sanguine, especially this patch, make it more fine. I'm not in love with Sanguine just as a general affix, and I think that you've seen a lot of weeks where people just aren't really willing to play as much on Sanguine because you have invisible time loss just due to the mobs healing. I think that they could maybe go for a few more parameters for how to change Sanguine. I even saw something on Twitter the other day where it's like, instead of actually healing the mobs, what if you just gave them a 50% reduction, a damage reduction whenever they were standing in the Sanguine? That way it optimizes you like actively pulling the mobs out of them, right? You're never going to like actually leave mobs inside of Sanguine, but it doesn't punish you by fully healing a boss or something like that. I think that might be a good a bit of room to actually move Sanguine even into a much better category. I think as it currently stands, I think it's hard to be ranked anything except for fine. I'm not in love with Sanguine. I just think it's like okay. Skittish. I don't think threat should be a mechanic in the game. Just at their core, I think tanks already have a dumbass like enough time dealing with stupid threat. I don't love just you generating 25% threat being a mechanic in the game. I think that it came into this thing where it was like, the reason I got deleted is most likely because it just wasn't doing what it needed to do. Because Skittish is like, it was either a non-affix or it was annoying and killed your melee. And there was like no in between. Is the affix really my melee getting auto attacked by mobs? Like, that doesn't feel great. I think it getting deleted. It also wasn't like impactful at all. It was like, it just didn't. I don't think it fit like what an affix is supposed to do. Spiteful, God. I think I'm putting it in fun. How do I... Oh, God. So I think the changes to Spiteful to make it stop scaling at 20 did a lot of good for Spiteful just in general. I think... okay, I'm going to put in fun. I think that's my final placing. I'm trying to think about exactly where I wanted it. I'm going to leave it in fun. I think that Spiteful is okay, and I think the changes to make it not scale past level 20 was overall a great change. I think that people getting one-tapped by Spiteful Shades was not awesome, but I do think that, you know, having some, you know, the mobs, once they die, they spawn a ghost that follows you around. More often than not, you're just going to put it in the blender of AoE CC and melee. And I think that this is a bit punishing for melee DPS, just generally speaking. But overall, it's a lot better than it was. I think that this is definitely one of the better affixes. Whenever you look at the affixes that's being compared against, I would certainly put it a tier above those. Definitely one of the best in that regard. The only problem I see with Spiteful is combat. I actually agree with that. I think that being stuck in combat for 10 to 15 seconds after a pack is dead is kind of annoying. There was definitely specific points where there's also combat-based RP that, like, if you're in combat, you can't necessarily deal with. I'm thinking about taking portals in Rise and Fall. Thinking about what was another one? There's another portal. There's a bunch of RP stuff that you can't do. The Throne of the Tides elevator. You can't do that in combat either. So those are kind of annoying. But the Mist's Maze. But in general, I think that Spiteful is definitely one of the better designed affixes. Waiting 5 to 15 seconds to drink. Yeah, okay. So I think maybe they could get the Afflicted / Incorporeal treatment, where if you're fully out of combat with all the other mobs, maybe the Spitefuls go away or something like that. Because I don't think that's necessarily the goal for the affix, but I do think in general, Spiteful is definitely one of the better affixes we have. Okay, so I'll do Volcanic next. Volcanic, I think, has to go in the fun category as well. Whenever you see a Volcanic week on the calendar, you know that those are definitely some of the better weeks. There are specific instances where Volcanic can be kind of annoying, kind of similar to Entangling and Spiteful, but I think in general, the impact level of Volcanic is low enough to where this is definitely the fun week. And it's not because it's necessarily the easiest week, although it is kind of that. But I think in general, that's the kind of level that I want affixes to be at. Personally, I want it to be at the Volcanic, the Spiteful, the Entangling level of like difficulty. To whenever you look at that on a week, it's like, oh yeah, this is where I want it to be. It kind of sucks to get your full moon canceled, your fire breath canceled, any cast, void torrent, Volcanic spawns underneath me. All right, I'm ready to throw myself off the building, but I think you can only be so annoyed just in general with Volcanic. Storming, I think, kind of falls in the same category. Storming is like the melee equivalent of Volcanic. There are some weird actual issues with Storming that I don't think Volcanic has, where if your tank ever gets knocked up by a Storming, this could happen to Volcanic, but it just doesn't. If your tank ever gets knocked up by Storming, there's just a chance for the mobs to melee and fervent other melee DPS. Not a huge fan of that. I think that if that bug is fixed, I think that Storming could be a lot better. I think that adding the one charge to Storming whenever you hit the tornado one time, it's much better. I think it's a bit cringe for tanks, but I think if your group is actively soaking it, Storming is in general speaking, going to be probably part of the fun affix group. There are some instances where it's a bit annoying, like people are pointing out in chat, but it's not like the end of the world. Last one, Teeming, absolutely fucking not. Um, I think Teeming could maybe fall into the rework category, where I think that there's some elements of what we had with Teeming that could have been okay. But I think time and time again, they just picked the absolute worst mobs to team in every single key. It was like, oh, we got an extra Purifier in King's Rest. Oh, we got an extra Lieutenant mob in Siege of Borealis. Oh, we got just, it was always just like the worst mobs. It was like a second witch and stuff like that. I think if it was a bunch of like the non-important mobs and your count that was required was only increased by a little bit, it would have been interesting. But I also think that for average players who don't really play that much, teaming is such like a jarring experience because you know you have your route, you play that every single week. You know those are roughly the route that you're playing, and then you just some week have to have 30% or 30 additional count, or you have to do like completely different pulls because it's teaming. That doesn't like seem great for average players. Because it's not changing the route in regards to what the mobs do. It's changing the route because you just need to pull more packs of trash. Yeah. Okay, so now let's field some opinions. Sanguine is a delete for me. It's just so much time lost compared to other affixes. Maybe it doesn't feel so bad to play, but it's way slower than anything other than bolstering. Okay, so I agree with that. But then whenever how I categorized a lot of these is like, was this like fun to play? Are there like major fundamental issues with these? Also, like, what is the playability of that week? And so while the playability of Sanguine is generally lower than it has been in the past, I think it's more or less fine. Like you do have to do a lot of work, especially a lot of it's on your tank, just being able to move the mobs in a correct manner. But I think in general, Sanguine is probably on the fine end for me. It's also incredibly variable in dungeons. Sanguine in Warcraft Manor is not the same as in Natal'Zar. That's true, because most mobs in Natal'Zar don't do on-death affixes, where in Warcraft Manor, a lot of them can be kind of annoying. They should rework Afflicted and Incorporeal. It excludes the classes that are already having a difficult time getting into keys from those keys. Yeah, I don't... That's why I think that they're also kind of bad. I don't know if they necessarily need to... Oh, gosh. There's probably some subtle changes that they could actually make to them that wouldn't be like a full-scale rework. That would actually make them a bit better. But I also just don't... I'm not in love with the concept of eating your healer's dispels and, like, eating CC. I just think in general, like, you should be promoted for CCing mobs. You should be promoted for, like, dispelling correctly. And so, like, affixes that kind of eat those, I'm not, like, huge on. The segment experience could not be more different in LFG versus Core Data teams, and I think that bursting is very similar, too. Where the experience is in general terms a lot different, just with like what you're gonna get. I think that healer is a role that also is just much different at lower level keys than higher level keys, which is also a huge problem. I was reading something, there's like apparently like a lot of data that's talking about like healer. It was talking about like healer agency. And healer agency in low-level keys versus high-level keys is just, like, night and day different. And so then, you know, bursting also falls in that category where it's, like, the healer is... Like, the group is better, so the healer has, like, less to heal in general. And they're also going to press defensives if they see themselves getting a bunch of stacks of bursting. And so it'll make it obviously more healable. I still think that Sanguine is probably just in the category of, like... If this was a DR as opposed to a heal, this is just like much different experience. Feels a lot different too. Because then it doesn't just like completely ruin your work. Overall though, I would love to see changes to affixes going into the War Within. I think that the affix system is definitely something that Blizzard's kind of been tiptoeing around how they necessarily want to deal with it. I don't think they fully... I think that they have a lot of ideas and they don't know exactly where they want to land on a lot of stuff. I'm kind of interested in seeing if they could... maybe just go with like a completely new idea for the War Within, or maybe even like the Fated season. That would be kind of cool. Just see them kind of test with some stuff, play around with some new stuff.